Before I introduce our plenary this evening, I have a housekeeping announcement. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 is our voting plenary, and that's the time when you have the opportunity to exercise your democratic right in developing policy for our organization. So tomorrow morning, 9:30, we need to see all of you there, so you have your marching orders. Now I want to pivot to the next session on our agenda. It's a very special plenary we have for you. A year ago at our AGM, we relaunched Art for Amnesty under the brilliant leadership of the National Director, Marvin Bing. Let's hear it for Marvin. Art has always been at the cornerstone of Amnesty. Throughout history, throughout the ages, wherever there's been a social justice or a human rights justice struggle, artists have been at the heart of that. Writers, poets, painters have used their voices to speak on behalf of those who don't have those voices, and also to help shape and frame what those messages are and what those struggles are about. And for many, many years, artists have stood with us at Amnesty, and have used their voices and their art to fight against human rights abuses around the world. And now here in this country, as in almost every other country in the world, there's a new generation of artists that are coming up, that are standing with us, that are standing with social justice movements. These new artists, some of whom you'll meet this evening, they're standing up and they've taken on that mantle, they've grasped that mantle, and they're now flying that flag of human rights and social justice very, very high. And we follow them and we're grateful to them. The first couple of moments of our plenary this evening, we're going to show you just a snippet of a documentary that we commissioned called Canvases of Courage. And it's a documentary that looks at Art for Rights, which was our extraordinary program in New Orleans, which focused on right for rights and the cases that we highlighted in Art for Rights. So I'm going to have our tech people roll the documentary for a couple of minutes.
The cases that just happened in New Orleans where this kid was just sentenced. They're about to spend X amount of millions of dollars on this kid by putting him in prison forever. Would they ever have made that investment in his life before he made this bad decision?
I also was the subject of the 80s by a herd of skinheads.
The purpose of telling a story is to tell a story that might not have been told before, tell a story that needs to be told.
We were targeted because we had been members of the Black Panther Party.
People are jailed for their words, for speaking their version of the truth.
After 4 days, they do eat nothing. You need that people to be outside today, not tomorrow.
The issues in the Congo are far more than cases of individuals being wrongly accused of inciting terrorism.
I'm battling oppression in my own country here in America, just as a Native American. I don't like it. And so the way I look at my art and my role in making art in American society is to push back against institutional racism.
And now you're going to hear directly from the artists who created this work. So I'd like to welcome them to the stage, and I'd like to welcome Sarah Hoy from Al Jazeera America, who will be moderating this panel and introducing them. So come on up.
Well, hello. Good evening. I'm Sarah Hoy. I am a correspondent for Al Jazeera America, primarily the show America Tonight. And this evening, I have an entire panel of artists who you need to meet. So just bear with me. I do have my phone here. I'm not texting. I'm not tweeting. I'm not Facebooking. This is where my notes are. Since it's 2016, I'm told to be hip. So I'm just going to go down the line and introduce you to this wonderful panel of artists, some of which their work you already saw in that clip, but this group here was part of the magic that happened in New Orleans. Right next to me, though, here, I'm going to start with you since you're closest to me. We have Gerard Butler. Excuse me. That's not Gerard Butler. Don't tweet that. Gerard Bush, he's the creator of the documentary that you got to see the clip of. But also our panelists are Sophia Dawson, Jesse Crimes, Christy Sandoval, Bayunga, don't be mad. I have cheat. Bayunga, Kila Lewuka.
Thank you.
Douglas Miles, Brandon B. Mike Odom, and once again,
my people
Gerard Bush. What was that?
I said that's my people back there.
Okay. So as we looked at this clip, as you know, they created magic down in New Orleans. I didn't get into all of their background because they have quite a body of work among everybody here. We can get into that during this discussion. We have some time. So I'll let them somewhat explain of the art that they like to do, how they create, and how they make that happen. But for now, some of the stuff that I want to talk about is start with this documentary that covered this event down in New Orleans. So Gerard, if you would, talk to us about what it is that you wanted to convey with this piece.
I think it was really important for us anyway that we could give access to people that might not necessarily understand what's happening on the ground with these really important issues of freedom being attacked globally. I know that, from our perspective, music has popularized a lot of issues as of late that are really important to the world, and I think these artists and what they're doing is really extraordinary. So what we wanted to capture is just them and their process, creating this work, being motivated by the particular issues that they decided to partner with in order to create the work. And I think the energy of what was happening in New Orleans was palpable. And as long as we could communicate that via the film in some small manner, then we felt like we would win.
And ultimately, what do you want people to walk away with after they watch this? What is it that you hope people learn?
I hope people learn that there is an opportunity to express yourself on some level in order to communicate something really powerful for people that can't communicate for themselves. I think all of these artists that are here, they're, obviously they're incredibly gifted, blessed artists, but I think that all of us have some method in which we could communicate or express ourselves in the service of others.
Well, and speaking of that expression, and I'm going to throw this to the entire panel and jump in as you see fit. When we talk about that expression, right, when it comes to art, a lot of times folks may say it's the expression of self. But here we are, and we're talking about art for Amnesty. You were artists who are also activists. So talk about that line, that line you crossed, if you will, or that you merge between doing art for yourself and art for change. Anyone?
I'll start. So I feel like I made that transition in the year 2010 when I first discovered I could paint. It was new to me, and I was just doing it because it felt good, and it was cool to paint my pops and my moms and just see their reaction. But after I took a class, African American history class, introduced me to the Panthers and a whole bunch of stuff that I just didn't know or wasn't aware of. I wasn't woke or conscious or anything like that. And but from that point, I have made a conscious decision to have or to create art with the message. And it's really hard to go back. And so even when I'm asked to do something on a specific issue, to me it's just as important as if I feel moved to do something for myself. So I think both worlds have merged in a way.
And who did you feature in New Orleans?
In New Orleans, Yesenia Menta.
How did that impact you?
You said, how did that impact me?
Yeah.
It was my first time learning about the fact that so my personal work focuses on political prisoners that are in the United States. And so working with Amnesty, that was my first time working with Marvin. That was my introduction to the fact that people being politically incarcerated is an international issue. And so I feel that there's so much more work to do than what I thought.
And anybody else want to take on that, doing art for self and also art for activism?
I'll go. I feel that I started by telling my own story. And that's how I felt how powerful that was, to put that out there, to be able to sort of just put on a canvas these themes of identity that I was going through. And so through that, I wanted to tell other people's stories. And I paint a lot of murals. So with murals, it's for the public. It's not about me. It's about telling other people's stories. And I have this ability to paint something, and I want to use it for good.
Are you using it for good?
Yes.
You know, and there's also this belief, right, that, like we said, art is a form of self-expression. Is there ever the case where we just do art for art's sake? B. Mike?
No, I mean, me speaking personally for myself, I think no. I feel like an elder told me a long time ago that art for art's sake was not the reason that art was ever done. You know, it was always strongly tied to more than just that. It was more than just expressing yourself, but it was aligning and understanding that your expression had power. And the idea of activism, to me, really is just this thought that you have value. You know, once you understand that you have value, then you realize that you're going to do what's necessary to announce that value and to share, to understand that everybody shares in that value. And I think as artists, we find ways to communicate that's a little bit different. You know, I mean, we're all just communicators. It's just the idea that we can communicate with something that's just not our words. So as art activists, we just decided to communicate in the same way that everybody in this room communicates activism, where we just communicated with our paintbrushes. And I feel like once you have that responsibility, it's hard for you to kind of just be in a rock, under a rock, and just say, you know what, this is for me only. And Dr. King said, almost always the creative, dedicated minority has made the world a better place. So that lets you know that there's a responsibility, you know, that's always been aligned and tied to how things change.
Now I see a few heads nodding behind you. Anybody else want to jump in?
I agree with Brandon, and I want to add to what he's saying. I think people that make art for art's sake, I think that's nice. I think it's really nice. It's quite, I don't know what you would say. It's almost like just something that you do just for fun. But everybody here in the room, we're not making art it's fun, but we're making art because we have something to say, and we have communities. Some of our communities are under siege. Mm-hmm. We're battling in our communities. Mm-hmm. So art for art's sake is a nice construct. You know, it's nice if you got a nice fancy museum and a nice fancy gallery, a nice TV network. Well, let's just make something nice. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure all the artists up here are not trying to make something nice for people.
And talk about the impact of that work. I mean, when we talk about Art for Amnesty in New Orleans, there was something that happened, right? One of the artists, well, two of the artists on stage here today featured someone who was let out. There was an actual, something happened, right? I mean, there's a lot of times, I'm sure, where you create something and you often wonder, does it reach anybody? Right? We're not just doing something, like you said, Doug, to do something that's nice. You want to have impact. And this goes to, you know, Jesse, and I can throw it to you as well as B. Mike as well. You know, when you guys came together to do this had real impact. And for those who don't know, I'm talking about Albert Woodfox, who was released from Angola after 40 years of solitary confinement. So to be a part of that, right, from an outsider looking in as somebody who covered this event, who then followed up with it and saw what had happened, but to be a part of that as a creative unit, what was that like to see the true impact of your work? Whether it was just one person, two people, three people, four.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I mean, I had a very kind of direct experience with solitary confinement and the prison system. So, you know, I feel like all of the work that I make, it comes from that experience in some kind of way. And it's always a very personal experience. But, you know, because that experience was so kind of intense that it comes out in my work no matter what I do. So to be able to have that experience and then focus on a case like Albert's was really powerful. You know, because when you go into the prison system, and in particularly solitary confinement, I mean, you're left with nothing. Like, you're stripped of everything, and you have no human contact, and you know, it's hard to convey what that's like to other people. So, you know, being able to make that solitary confinement cell and portray not just like the physical aspects of what it's like to be inside of these walls, but also to convey like the psychological toll that takes on you as a human being. You know, it was really intense making it. Like, it kind of brought me back because I was like back in this prison cell making it. But to be able to do that and then have it play, you know, any part in what was happening to get him released was really empowering. Having that personal connection and having that experience, not nearly to the extent of what Albert experienced, but you know, it's something that it's just a really intense thing. So being able to kind of combat these systems that are designed to kind of oppress and dehumanize you, it feels good.
And Brandon, what about you? I mean, that's a hometown connection for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I still struggle to find the words to describe how exciting it is to think about. I mean, I painted them twice. One for a larger mural that's like directly across from the Superdome in New Orleans, and the other one was on the canvas for the Art for Rights campaign. And when you paint somebody, I think there's a connection that happens. It's kind of like you get to know them for a certain capacity because you're looking at the face for so long, and so there's a connection that happens. So for me, painting them those two times, I felt like I educated myself so much about what was happening and what at least tried to imagine what his reality was like, you know. And so to see that transition happen and to see that a lot of people who were paying attention, that were watching, were able to connect the event, all the people who was working so hard to fight for his release, and then to see it happen, it kind of was like an encouragement to let you know that this is doing something, that this work is actually, it has the possibility to make real life change. And that painting is currently on display in this show that I have, and we do a lot of school tours with like young people as young as kindergarten to high school, and I always stop and talk about his case, and I talk about exactly what happened, and the response is always from kids as young as second grade. We're like, "But that's not right." You know, before we even tell them that he got released, we tell them the story, and all of them, you know, in unison is like, "Wait, that's not right." And then to be able to follow up his story to say, "But he's released now," and the excitement on their face is something that's just crazy to see. And it's also crazy because I see him all the time now. So it's like I see him walking the dog, I see him walking with his grandkids, and it's just crazy to go through that whole process of seeing him just on these images. And now a friend of mine was driving and almost hit him by mistake just because she was so excited to see him just walking. Wow. So just that is crazy alone. That's yeah.
Well, and speaking of solitary, let's talk about censorship, right? You know, and even as artists, I'm sure there may have been a point at some point, some of you might have felt that, right? That you might have been painted into a box, or you weren't able to do something, or you needed to do something in order to get your expression out. You know, is there anyone on the stage who wants to address what that's like to be as an artist, not only fighting for rights of others, but also rights for yourself?
I would say that censorship is an issue that I personally have not perceived it as a tremendous or a major issue. What I would say is that what's most important is to be aware that there's a responsibility component of what you put out there. And so whether you want to say, whether you consider yourself censoring what you do or don't do, that's up to the individual. But it's important to consider the impact of what you put out there. And so I think that goes for everyone on the panel. And it's also part of what affects what we're fighting against. The simple fact that we are not paying attention to the information or the messages, the importance of what is being put out there. So I think it's crucial that we pay attention to that.
I also think that it requires courage to tell these stories. I think that it's easy, to stick with what's been homogenized and what's not reality for what millions of people are experiencing. And I think that there's a responsibility as creatives, like what B. Mike said, that you have to make a commitment to using that gift towards the furtherment of society in a way that's positive and that can make an impact. And I think that there are the powers that be that have a tremendous amount of control for what people experience and what people see. And as artists, I think that it's a responsibility to provide an unvarnished sort of view of what's really happening and communicate that in a way that that people can understand. And one of the most powerful ways that you can do that is visually, right? Because it's sort of a universal language. You can look at an image and it can make an impact with you without having need for further information. You can look at it and interpret it in your own way.
Well, and speaking of that view from that perspective of you were behind the lens, to see this group come together and some others as well, to watch that kind of happen, right? Mm-hmm. To kind of see this come together, bringing people from all over, one cause, creating impact. What was it like for you to watch?
I mean, it was extraordinary, frankly. And Marvin being, is someone who I have a tremendous amount of respect for after having watched that process, and him as a curator bringing these artists together who, by the way, I think that it requires a tremendous amount of trust on the part of the artist toward, the curator, which he enjoys a pretty powerful relationship with them, which I was able to see firsthand. But to see the artists come together and to see it in that setting, in New Orleans, to watch them sort of go through their processes, I felt so blessed that they would let me stand behind them while they were creating something and while we were filming, in fact. I knew when we were going to go into post that I didn't want to disrespect their process by showing the work being created in the film without the viewer, without the audience seeing it in totality. So we didn't reveal the art until the end in color, so that people could kind of, I wanted to respect their process, but it was extraordinary to be around them, to be able to spend any time with these artists and watch them create these amazing works. It's something that I hope that in some small way, the audience, when they see the film, that they can feel that.
Well, and just kind of jumping from that, I mean, when I look at this panel, this is not my mother's Amnesty International, right? I mean, really what you have here is a unique group, young, fresh, doing something different, reaching a totally different audience, if you will. And a big part of that is also social media. All of you have a pretty good presence online. You reach out to your audience, your followers. How would you say social media is also helping push the impact or also changing the dialogue? Just as when you think of on the greater scale of where we are at this country right now, whether it's Black Lives Matter or this campaign ramping up and all the rhetoric being out there, how would you say social media is helping you get out your message?
I feel like there's pros and cons to social media, especially for visual people. I think that it's great to have access to so many people instantly, all the time. But I think that social media also it may not be social media. In today's world, I feel like everybody has really short attention spans, and social media helps them to deal with that. And so, because, you know, they see our message and they see the work and they're seeing what we're posting, you know, they may feel that by liking it or writing a comment or by sharing it, that does help to a certain extent, but that's not the same as like physical bodies actually doing stuff together. And so I go back and forth with that all the time, just trying to figure out how social media can actually activate someone from like the comfort of their bedroom or their bathroom, toilet, or wherever people are where they're swiping and looking up, like, and how do you create images that stop people in their tracks when people see millions of images every day. And I think that that's one of the things I find most challenging, but then the plus side is that I do have access to so many eyes, and we do have access to so many people, and some people learn about things for the first time through social media. I know I could definitely testify to that myself, so I go back and forth.
Anyone else?
I also think that you've seen a huge democratization of art through social media. I think that there was this idea for a lot of people that art was really unapproachable, and that it was a certain sect that really owned that space. And I think social media has allowed a certain access that didn't exist before. Obviously that there are pros and cons, but Douglas Miles said something that was really interesting in the documentary, where he said, you know, we have access to social media. I don't need an intermediary or a liaison to speak for me and translate what I'm trying to say to an audience. I can actually speak directly to the audience, which social media allows. And I think that that's got to be a powerful vehicle for these artists. I don't think that they like to have to sit around and, like, you know, on top of the job of creating art, to have to constantly worry about promoting something via social media. That's a whole nother job on top of it. Like, I understand that portion of it, but I think that it does offer access that we didn't have before.
Sure. Well, and Douglas, did you want to follow up?
I like social media. I mean, I like it for what it can do if you have the right content, not if you just have like selfie after selfie after selfie after selfie. But I like selfies too, because selfies are an art form in themselves. No, yeah, the pun is intended. But for artists of color, I look at social media as a platform that I've never had, because it's almost like leveling the playing field. It's not necessarily a great equalizer, but it does level the playing field if you're kind of semi-decent at creating semi-decent content and can take a semi-decent photograph. And so, and then you pair it with, you know, the content or the written content or the all ubiquitous hashtag. And so the social media becomes a platform that I myself as an artist, and you can follow me on Instagram under dmiles1_Apache. But I look at it.
Wait, I'm sorry. What was that? Let me get that. What was that?
It's a way for artists of color to curate their own space, because we're not really given. And somebody brought this up earlier. We're not given access to galleries or museums or media publications or magazines. You know, the Newsweeks or the Juxtapose or the People magazine. We're not given that, but. So that's the way I look at social media. It gives me access.
Well, and speaking of that access, Douglas, let's stick with that and then also open that to the panel. How do you then inspire other young black faces, brown faces, women, men who also want to pursue art as a career but might think that it still is out of reach?
Well, I do say this. You really cannot build a career on social media alone. The sad thing, with all the good things about social media, the sad and scary thing about social media, and in particular Twitter, is there is no transparency. So you could be an activist on Twitter, but at home in your own community, you could be a thief too. So all leaders in all communities have to be tested. But on social media, you can't be tested. You could just post a nice photo and a nice catchphrase hashtag and become that leader, and that's the scary thing about social media. But if you're a young person and you want to have a voice on social media, then I would say work in your community first, document it, and use social media to share that documentation.
Well, then staying with the inspiration, I mean, for others here, how do what would be your advice, or how do you inspire those others who might have come through New Orleans and saw your work? Because one of the things for me that just really stood out was this group of people who came together who you wouldn't necessarily think would all be in the same room, and then these causes that so many of which I never even knew about. I learned something, I'm sure other people learned something, and you guys were right there. We could walk up to you, talk to you, touch you, feel you, get what's inside of your head about this piece. So talk about how you would inspire others who might think what you do is not for them, that they can't do it, that you're somehow mythical creatures.
I think just by continuing to do what we do and just sticking to it, putting it out there, and that alone inspires. And through arts education, there's so many different types of art, and there's so many different types of just careers within the art that through arts education, there's so many communities that don't even have access to arts education. So in putting that out there, I think is making it accessible to those who are trying to learn more about it and find a career in it, and see that it's not, that it is accessible, that it's there, and you just put your mind to it, and there you go.
I also think that young people have to realize that, you have a right to have the audacity to believe that you can have an extraordinary impact. I think that you have that right. And oftentimes people feel like, especially younger people, black and brown girls, feel that they're relegated to a really narrow bouquet of sort of opportunities. And that's just not the case. So I think as artists, as creatives, you just go out and do the best work that you can, that you live and you create in integrity, and hope that people notice through example, if nothing else. But I think that young people of color and minorities and underserviced communities, have to know that within their heart that they have the audacity to live an extraordinary life and to have an extraordinary impact.
I think also to add to what you're saying, I agree exactly, because I think it's about letting people know that they don't need validation to speak their pain and articulate their story. And I think for so long there's this idea that you have to have that uniform, or you have to have that degree, or you have this idea that, and then you can speak about your pain. And I think for me, it's always been about showing that you can do that right now. Like, I'm painting these things, or this is the way I'm working around these issues, and it's all aligned with this idea that you have value, and that's all it takes is once you realize that value you have, then you're going to defend it. It's no different from somebody slapping your mom. Like, you're going to respond to it. You know what I mean? It's like, what? No, I'm going to respond. I think for so long we've got numb to this idea, like this is the way it's supposed to be. Like, dogs chase cats, cats chase mice, we get beat by the police, the schools are bad, like this is the way it's supposed to be. So I think for a lot of ways, us as artists, what we're trying to show is that alternative image, to say, nah, this is not how it's supposed to be. And then those that are viewing it is like, oh, word? And then they're going to do what's necessary to respond, to say, yeah, you're right, this is not what it's supposed to be. People are not supposed to be in solitary confinement for 43 years. You know what I mean? It's like, once you acknowledge and feel liberated enough to say that, then things begin to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to add to that. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. No, because I work with young people. I work with middle school kids. I work with youth that are on probation and lockup facilities, etc. And I think the first step is exposing them to our work, but I always ask them, like when we're trying to generate ideas for a mural or a project, my first question is like, what's one thing that you're either really happy about, or what's one thing that pisses you off? And they always want to talk about something that makes them mad. And like, I'm thinking about one group, and the issue was snitching, right? It's like, I can't stand people that snitch. And so just like showing them, like starting with where they're at, like speaking their language, because sometimes they don't want to talk about these bigger issues, or they're not ready to address them, but like there's things that, cause them to feel some type of way. And also some kids, for example, this one kid who wanted to do art, but then like he felt like it was so out of reach, and then I found out that he was in love with fashion and clothing and stuff like that, so we did a piece on some vintage clothes that I pulled out at thrift shop. So it's kind of just like kind of being the inspiration for them through the work that you're doing, but also learning to speak what language they speak, and then just expose them to the process. Like I try to teach them, like, this is not, like you said, a mystical process. Like, there are steps that I follow to get from point A to point B with each piece of work. So once they learn that, they feel really empowered, because then they now know how to do it themselves, or then go around and teach their peers how to do the same thing. So.
And with that, let's talk about investing in the arts, right? So, I mean, here there was a conscious decision made to bring this group together to do a certain thing. How important is it for organizations, and there are other nonprofits doing this, to truly invest, not just say, here's a couple dollars, let's try to do something neat or cute, pretty, but let's make some real change. How important is it to have those mashups, if you will, of organizations, those dollars out there, plus the artists? How crucial is that to advancing whatever it is you're advancing?
I deal with that a lot. So like, it's kind of hard to be an artist and then also be a professional, right? Because so much about being an artist is exploring like unknown terrains and making mistakes and failing big time. And like, that's where you learn everything, right? That's where you get creative. That's how you get around censorship. So like when I was in prison, I couldn't make certain artwork, so I had to come up this way to get around it and ship it out and do all these things. But you know, there was room for me to fail in there. And not that prison is an organization that supports artists, but it was like a weird space where I didn't have to worry about financial things. I didn't have to worry about, you know, feeding myself or paying the bills because I was in prison. So I could just make artwork all day, every day, and then I had that creative freedom to express myself. And I think that's really important when you come across organizations and when you work within organizations, to allow the artists to feel valued, feel supported, and feel like they can just focus on creating. And a lot of that comes with, you know, a lot of it's financial. You know, as artists, it's a struggle to make a living as a professional artist. So like, I'm constantly applying to grants and applying to fellowships and applying to all of these things, trying to fund my art process. And in doing that, it really kind of deteriorates my ability to create and experiment and fail, because everything's supposed to be so kind of polished. But it's really important to work with an organization and feel like, you know, you have the creative freedom to make what you want to make and feel supported in doing that.
Anyone else?
I find that investing in art represents what's important to us. Conservation should not just be for a specific group of, you know, in society that sees value in certain forms of art. I think in general, it's important for us to pay attention to what's important to all of society. And so I think that's where investing in a lot of work that we do helps represent that.
And why create?
I'm sorry?
Why invest in that creation,
yes.
right? I mean, why do
exactly,
that?
Exactly. The message of showcasing what's important to us is by far the most important message of all.
I also think that there's you know, to your point, there's also a lot of opportunity now with brands, I think, than there was before. I think that, you know, you primarily think of nonprofits as opportunities for art and pushing that forward. But I think that there are a lot of brands that have become much more amenable to that idea, because the consumer now wants to understand, you know, where is this coming from? How is this having an impact? And so I think social media, segueing back originally to social media sort of pulls back the curtain of what a lot of these brands are or not doing, which I think they feel an increased pressure to take some responsibility and would engage with artists on that level.
Well, speaking of brands, everybody here has to somewhat have a brand, right? And I mean, especially in this day and age, some of what that is who you are as the artist, right? It's as much as important as your work itself. How do you juggle that world, right, of being the artist, creating what you create, but then also maintaining your brand?
I want to say something to the last point too, real quick, and I'm gonna jump on the brand.
I'm sorry, say again?
No, I'm gonna say something to the last point right quick about the investment in the arts, and I do think also it should be thought about on terms of including artists in the beginning. I think oftentimes we deal with spaces where we're included at the very last step, like after the thoughts are thought and the policies are written and the brainstorming is done, then it's like, okay, here's the papers, articulate, create something around that. And I think organizations would be surprised at what would happen when they include artists in the very beginning and say, okay, let's build something together. And that's another type of investment that basically allows the artist to be deeply woven into whatever they're involved with and they're creating. But as far as the brand, I think about my brand, and even I struggle to even call it a brand, but I understand it as a brand, and I think it's just being truthful. I mean, Art for Amnesty quote, I don't even know if we say slogan, but a lot of ways is that quote from Paul Robeson that said, artists are the gatekeepers of truth. And I think, like Nina Simone said, it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. So I think that our brand, or at least my brand, is heavily burdened by the idea of truth. And it's hard to, it's almost like they're both opposite, because a brand seems to be a little bit like with a motive, when truth tends to just be truth. You know, it can't be debated, it's truth. So I think that's the balance in that, like trying to maintain speaking truth at all costs, at all times. And sometimes that's contrary to pushing a brand, you know, because sometimes, you know, the brand might tell you, you gotta not say that, but the truth says, nah, you gotta say that. So
sure,
the brand is truth. You dig?
It's a funny time. It's a funny time to think of yourself as a brand, but it's actually true. And I like what he said about branding and the brand. I mean, we'll use Amnesty, for example, as a brand, but now this is a day and age where people want truth and legitimacy and integrity from their brands. People will not buy one box of macaroni and cheese if they think this macaroni and cheese company is ripping off the community. They're like, we're not going to get that one, but we're going to get this one. And then another good example is Starbucks. Now Starbucks is offering to pay for some of their employees to go to school. And so this is, now people want integrity from their quote-unquote brands. But going also back to the earlier point, it is extremely important for organizations to invest in artists, because artists are doing what you're doing, except we're doing it, like he said, with paintbrushes or hammers or nails. Like Jesse, he built that cell to give us a 3 and a 4th and a 5th dimensional experience of what that's like. Like, I didn't even go in that cell, and I have personal reasons not to. I've watched people go in, I saw pictures of it, I talked to him, but I just wouldn't go in there. I mean, no disrespect, that was an amazing installation in New Orleans, but I didn't just want to go in there. But with regard to artists and organizations investing in artists, artists keep people honest. Artists keep the community honest, especially artists that are working in community, talking about community, because and the best artists combine community and activism almost seamlessly. You can't even tell when you're listening to a Bob Marley song that he's trying to tell you to get up, stand up for your rights. You're dancing to a revolutionary chant. By the time you're getting up dancing to Bob Marley, you're chanting down Babylon. By the time you're snapping your fingers to Marvin Gaye, listening to the jazzy sounds of what's going on, you're actually listening to socio-political culture commentary in 1974, what's really still relevant today. Whether it's Stevie Wonder or Kendrick Lamar, all of these artists up on the stage we're all doing the same thing. We're taking our art, combining it with our love for community, and accessing whatever you want to call it, pop culture, music, hip hop, film. We've got filmmakers up here, we've got photographers. the best artists, I say, combine politics, activism, community, and work and creativity seamlessly. But that's the challenge. And then, young artists too, young artists, sometimes you fall, you make a mistake, or sometimes it seems a little forced, but you mature, and that's what older artists like myself are for. We can say, oh, we'll try it this way, or try it this way, or try it that way. And then myself, being Native American, of course, I want to say something about not only being Native American, but being Native in America. What's that like? It's almost like you said something about, oh, artists are mystical. People look at me like I'm either a saint or a savage.
Right.
I'm never no in between. I'm never just a person. But I am a person. I come from a real tribe, but so does everybody else up here. Everyone else comes up from real tribe. I met a man here yesterday from Ethiopia, and he got the tribe. And so we're all tribal people, and we all want our tribes to persevere and last for the next couple of eons. And so that's what we do. We try to preserve our family. We're trying to preserve our people. We're trying to preserve our community before they push us out or gentrify us out or try to flood us out.
Does that journey get frustrating ever? Do you ever feel as though you're being muted? And if so, what's your breaking point, if you've had one?
I mean, I think it's our responsibility as people, whether it's, for black folk, black and brown people have to take responsibilities for telling our own stories. And I think that oftentimes you feel like, you have no autonomy over your story. And I think with these artists, it's this understanding of, if we're not going to tell these stories, then who is? We have to take responsibility for telling these stories for ourselves to the people. And I think, in Hollywood, they decide what movies are going to be made. They decide to make movies that are historically inaccurate, right? And have people that are, Egyptians being played by Caucasians, just craziness, right? So that's not accurate. So I think that as artists, we have to, as creators, you have to accurately sort of reflect what's happening. And that's, who controls the story, who controls the narrative, that's everything.
And does that get frustrating? That journey to do that,
yes.
To be able to tell that story your way?
Yeah, I think it does, but I think we're able to tap into that and channel it into what becomes the art. I think the tradition of great art, and as Doug said, from tribal people, has always been this idea of turning that pain into art, or articulating the pain through these beautiful ways. I mean, I come from New Orleans, and that space is, I mean, just look at the way we celebrate death. It's a party, and it's this idea of transforming pain into art. That's the tradition that I was raised in, and so for me, that frustration is not the stop sign. That frustration is the green light. That's like, okay, now this is how you're going to channel this into your work. It's the idea of alchemy, that transformation, turning lemons into lemonade or turning lead into gold. That's what we're up here with alchemists, and that frustration is a part of those ingredients that eventually we try to turn into gold.
Are you cashing in?
Am I who?
Cashing in?
Yeah, well,
In the proverbial sense.
Or in other ways.
In other ways. Go ahead.
I think it also comes from the idea of just trying to remember at all times, I mean, this goes for everybody, anybody going through anything, that challenges and hardships, they come and they seem like they're meant to break you, but they are meant to build you up and make you stronger for that next thing that you're going to face. Frustrations definitely do come, and blows do come, like the passing of Mando Wilanga, for example. That's the first time I experienced, because I'm writing all the political prisoners in the United States. So it's the first time experiencing someone that I'm writing pass away, knowing that I'll never receive another letter. And it's hard to continue, but it's like, if you don't continue, then that will happen more and more. And I really consider myself a co-creator with God. I feel like He gave me this gift for a purpose, and you know, I read the Bible and all of that all the time, and he says over and over again, like, he'll never leave us, never forsake you. So even if you feel like that, you got to remember that that's not true, and just kind of look beyond that to the end product of what you're trying to attain.
And how do we measure, right, the impact of your work? I mean, is it something that is tangible? You know, when we're doing things, or you're doing things, especially with a project like this, how do you measure your impact? Sure, you know, Albert might have gotten out, but then in other instances, and the other people you focused on and featured, how do you measure the impact there?
I think you can start by paying attention to the questions that come as a result of it. I will start there in terms of evaluating how to measure the impact.
Sure. Anyone else?
I feel like measuring the impact is something that will take time. As I create and make work on these issues, I feel like I try to stay conscious of the fact that I may not even live to see some of the impact of the work that we're doing. But I think about, I have a 6-year-old son, Pharaoh, and so I'm constantly dreaming about what, you know, his life or his world would look like at 18, at 21. You know, what, I always do this, so whenever I start getting discouraged about something, for example, some of the work on police brutality, just picturing my son standing up in front of a classroom at the age of 18, and maybe the assignment was pick a social justice issue of the past and talk about it and teach the class, teach your peers about it who may not know about it, and thinking about some of the things that we deal with today and some of the things that we're up against today as one day being things of the past. I don't know when that will happen, but I try to approach the work in that way, because it's hard to think about the impact. It's hard to know if anything that you're doing is going to work or be successful now, but yeah.
Well, having said that, what drives you?
God. I guess the victories that come along the way. Albert is one of them, but you know, a few years ago, I learned about the Central Park Five for the first time, did their portraits, went to meet them at court, was like, listen, I'm trying to help expose your story through my art. And you know, it took time for them to win their case, and it's not that the art did that, but knowing that little things that I've contributed to along the way have reached some type of victory, and sometimes it's something that is public, but sometimes it's, you know, a mother of a child who died at the hands of law enforcement coming out and helping you paint a mural about her child's story. So it's not necessarily always these big victories that are going to be in the papers or on the news, but sometimes it's the tiniest. Someone who has a smile all day that busted a smile, that's a victory to me. So
I don't know how you measure like tangible impact, but I know for the work that I made, specifically the work that I made while I was in prison, and some of the exhibitions that I've had since I've come home, you know, a lot of them were in like museums and galleries, and these are audiences that, I mean, they have no idea about the severity of what mass incarceration is doing right now. So, you know, I don't have any like calculator to actually measure what that impact is, but I know that through having conversations and giving artist talks about my work and doing workshops in these environments, it's bringing to light this whole issue that a lot of people were not aware of. Maybe not in the depth of it, you know, because a lot of time, right now, I guess there's a lot of kind of momentum behind mass incarceration and that as a movement, so it's getting a lot of media coverage. But again, going back to most individuals' attention spans, it's kind of very short. So a lot of people, if you're not connected to that issue, most people aren't going to take the time to read an article about mass incarceration. But the thing that's beautiful about artwork is that it's open-ended, right? It's kind of ambiguous. So it's something where I can use all of these materials and create this piece, and it's dealing with this very specific kind of complex issue that's really thorny, and it allows people to come into this space, view the work, and connect to the work in their own kind of personal way. So I'm not like dictating to them, telling them what to think or this is what it is. And then after they already form this kind of connection to the work, then it opens up that dialogue for me to have this more kind of connected conversation with them rather than just trying to tell them that this is bad, this is wrong. So I like letting that work be open and allowing people to come into it, because it's a more kind of sincere connection for me to speak about these issues that obviously I care a lot about.
Well, and speaking of that care, and this goes to the entire panel, you know, when you're creating things that have a message, right? There's something that you want to get out to people. And I've asked several of you this question before, but I'm going to pose it to all of you. Why should people care? Why is your voice important? Why is the issue you're putting out there something we need to pay attention to?
I think everybody's voice is important. And I think that, you know, there are issues that, you know, again, we've repeated this a lot within this conversation that we've had. There are people that can't speak for themselves. And I think that, you know, that becomes especially urgent, you know, to get your creative out in front of people so that they can understand these issues that are taking place. I think all of us have a voice, and I think that regardless of who you are, it really depends on your determination as to just how far you want to take it to be heard. But you know, I can't speak for anyone else on the panel, but I think that you know, whatever issues that you're really passionate about and it motivates you to actually go out and create art or create film, then you know, if you're that passionate about it and it's grounded in a place of integrity, I think it's worth sharing.
I think there's two parts to it. For example, I think that people should not wait until an issue comes knocking at their door for it to be important to them. I've had this experience in my own neighborhood in Brooklyn when Kimani Gray was murdered. That was just a few blocks from my house, and you know, I've been painting out of my garage for a long time, and I have neighbors, and I try to rap with them about what I'm doing, and they're not really trying to hear it. But then, like, when there's cops dressed in like war gear on every corner and you don't feel comfortable walking home, now you care about the issue. And so that's the first part. I just try to encourage people to learn about things before it's affecting them personally, because if you don't address it and try to put an end to it, it's going to just continue. But then the second thing is that people just don't know a lot of what's going on. It's not necessarily like, oh, you should care about this. It's just like, oh, you should know that this is happening. And if the person has a heart, they usually are moved in some way when they learn about different things. That was my own experience. Everything that I paint is something that I'm learning about, or I've just learned about for the first time. And because I'm moved by this, now I'm doing this. And so I kind of just want to have that as a ripple effect with the people that see my work or when I'm trying to put the message out there.
I think the artistry of Amnesty International is teaching people and getting people to care. Amnesty, what Amnesty does is teach and encourage people to understand what it's like to go through struggle. And at the core of that struggle and teaching people struggle is compassion. The real compassion, like a mother has for a child, is what motivates all of us, which motivates all of us in this room. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that kind of compassion. And that's the real artistry of Amnesty International and Art for Amnesty, is encouraging people through the arts, through dialogue, through teaching, through sessions, through conferences like this, through media, through social media, through films like Gerard Bush and Bush Renz, and through the work of behind the scenes, way behind the scenes, workers, people that got me art supplies, people that are going to pack up my painting. They're here because they care. But it's that caring that carries us into the next generation. It carries us into the next generation, and that generation carries us to the next generation. But when you really look, let's look around in the room, like there's still another 100 chairs over here that's empty, which means that we still have a work to do.
Right.
We still have a work to kind of draw people in, and either I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing it well enough. To teach people to care is really, I think, what art does. You could be a tap dancer, but you're going to teach people to care about movement. You could be a skateboarder, but you're going to teach people about reclaiming space. Like, I'm Native American, and I want to share with people what that is like to be Native in America without the mysticism and the stereotype, or the anti-Indian rhetoric, but I want to teach people, because all of these artists up here, what they're doing is they're building a bridge. And sometimes we tear the bridge down and we build it again, like Jesse said. Oh, we make mistakes. Let's tear it down, let's build it again. Let's rebuild it better. But we're all of us too, like Bush Renz and Marvin Bing, we're kind of like the Starship Enterprise, going where no man or woman gone before.
I like that. Me too. It's good. And I think that's a good part to end on there, Douglas. And before I get yelled at, we are able to take questions, I'm told. So there are some microphones. If you have some, hurry up, or I'll let Doug tell a poem. Because I know he has one.
Hi, my name is Sonia Baez, and I would like to, I think that they have a tradition of art activism since this, that was important, at least for for the civil rights movement. It was important, at least also a lot of art that was created anti-lynching. And then this type of art was created by Jewish, Mexican, African-American artists. And I think that somehow they was telling a story of oppression. And I think that sometimes we have also to know those aspects. And also then we have also to see the contributions of musicians, white musicians, that sometimes they do not accept, for example, to play in places that they will enforce any type of politics that exclude, like, for example, African Americans. And I think that that is important. So I think that when we talk about art, we have to talk about art within that aspect of human rights, because they have a traditions of artists working in human rights, and then they have a traditions of arts that is doing art activism, which is what you guys are doing. And I think that when we're thinking about the work that we're doing as an artist, then it's an aspect then that we're doing work to create to create a dialogue within the community and to change consciousness in the same things then, like, for example, when we do a petition or we sign a letter, somehow we engage in the community to promote a specific social change and awareness about any specific issues. And I think that the other aspect then that we have to think about art is then that it have an aspect of self-healing when we go into traumatic experience, and then our work come from that space of trauma or experience of violations of human rights, and then also the type of works then that activists, social activists and people that work in issues of human rights in the community, also they have this type of works that help people to heal the experience that they have, through oppression, rape, and so on, police violence. So I think that then we have to think in art in that sense, and then be empowered with this type of voice when we're thinking about the works that we do in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, over here.
Hi, my name is Pete. I'm an art activist from New York City. And first, a request that when we talk about art and money, everyone on stage is so inspiring, as you very eloquently described, but for a lot of young artists, oftentimes conversations about art and money are reductive and diminutive toward art practices. And the question I've always gotten from parents as a teaching artist consistently is, can they make a living? Can they do this? It's 2016. We need to be framing the conversation about art and money in positive, resourceful, hopeful, actualized ways. And I really appreciate the previous speaker, questioner's comment about the civil rights movement. It begs mentioning that Emory Douglas, his artwork for the Black Panther Party newspaper was critical for that paper to be sold, and it was the primary funder for the Black Panther Party, which the school breakfast program in the United States now was based on. So I really hope that the conversation about money is more positive. Quick question about socially engaged art practices, working with communities, especially two communities that are in conflict with one another, coming together. Have any of you worked in that way? And also, have you collaborated with other art forms, such as, I know Paul Chan did Waiting for Godot in New Orleans. I'm curious if you've collaborated with communities in that way and other artists in that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I work with communities. That's how I started. I wanted to work with communities, in particular the youth. And so what I do is, well, how I started was I would, let them dictate what this mural was going to be about. And so through working with organizations and different groups, what we do is we have a big community paint day. And through painting this mural and seeing all these people come up and paint, and no one's turned away, everyone gets a chance to participate, it really makes the mural a part of the community. It really speaks to it. It isn't vandalized because of it. So it's, to me, a very impactful way to work on public art.
Yeah, I think as a street artist, primarily, I think it's dishonest to not include community on all levels in the work that's created. And so that's kind of how I got back into visual arts, was really through these collaborations with different communities in New Orleans, and the conversation of how to, I guess, in the same way you said, Doug, reclaim public space in a space like New Orleans, where there's so much blighted property that's labeled as blighted property, but not thought about as what those properties used to be when they were inhabited by people who were displaced. And so a lot of my art was about really changing the way people saw those blighted properties, to really get them to understand and connect that these were occupied by families and people who have long stories of living there that are no longer here, and why aren't they here? So I feel like it goes hand in hand, that collaboration and community, as it fuels and informs and gives us the proper language to create, is one of the best practices that helps us, or helps me, build.
No? Yes.
Okay, I have two questions actually. For me and all the photographers in the room, would it be possible to get a picture with you and Marvin together? Yes. So that's the first question. Second question is when you mentioned the degree and not having to have a degree to be an activist or do art, I think was very loaded. We find that most of that money, most of funding goes to people that are credible. And so as artists, how do you make yourself credible within the community and not have a degree?
Since I spoke about the degree thing, I think there's, at least the way I was able to make it make sense, because I don't know who wrote it in the book, but there's goalkeepers and there's gatekeepers. The people, obviously the ones that are giving you the validation or the funding, would be the gatekeepers, but then the goalkeepers would be the people in the community that you impact with your work. When I begin to shift my focus and say, okay, I'm not going to worry about, these people who can potentially validate or tell me that what I'm saying is good enough, I'm going to just work on the response and impact to the people that I was communicating to. That's when those people begin to pay attention, because they saw that the people in the community were paying attention, because it was impacting them, and so I think sometimes when we focus as artists, when we just only focus on the gatekeepers and try to please them and try to craft our work in a way that makes it respectable and valid from them, and then we miss out on the fact that our work has a purpose, and the purpose is how it responds to the community. And that's something that's definitely, regardless, and it's hard to value on terms of money-wise, but to me that's more valuable than whatever I'm gonna get from any institute or any check, because it's like to know that my work has impact. And so that's where I shift my focus, and I have been shifting my focus. It works for me. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
I think the community itself makes me credible. Through a lot of my jobs I get through word of mouth. After one job, on the work that I did, then I get referred to another organization, and as I'm working, I'm approached constantly and told, like, thank you for doing this in our community. Thank you for being a part of this. And I've worked in some communities where people ask me, like, weren't you scared? And I wasn't. Like, I felt like I was doing something positive. Like, that thought didn't even cross my mind.
Well, it kind of goes to what this gentleman was saying, where it's like art and professionalism are kind of like, it's so opposite, but basically two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean? And so it's like, how do you navigate those waters, especially for the younger, when they want to have swag and they want to do their art the way they want to do their art, but then you have to be credible within the community for your people. It's just, But I do want that picture though.
Okay, got you.
But also to add, I think it's also about educating, especially for young folks. Like when I'm working with young people, I'm also trying to educate them about the idea of investing in art too, so that they become their own sources of support. Because I think sometimes it's hard for younger people to understand why it's valuable and important to buy an original piece from their best friend who's just starting out. You know what I mean? So getting them to like build that culture as well, to say, okay, that art has value and you should support each other. And that creates its own support model that encourages them to want to continue to build and create.
I think school and academics is always important, but I kind of have a bone to pick with academics with regard to the study of Native American people, because people are always looking at me as a piece of anthropology.
Thank you, Douglas. We have time for one more question over here.
Hi, I'm Adriana from Detroit, and I was wondering, with my personal experience of being an activist, feeling like I can't speak out about certain things because I don't identify certain things, or because I'm a white woman that I can't speak out about certain issues. I was wondering if you guys feel that way, or if you feel that way about creating your art.
Well, first of all, I think that you have a right to speak to any issue that's important to you, and I think as a human being, if you see injustice happening and you want to stand up and do something about it, I think that you should. And as a person, you have every right to identify with those issues. It doesn't mean that you have to have a personal experience of what it is to be, African American in order to want to stand up for equal rights for everybody, and that includes African Americans. As far as the artists are concerned and what they paint, I don't know, but.
Do you share that sentiment? Do you ever feel put in a box, or there's anything you can't speak to?
I think, okay, when it comes to painting murals and stuff, I'm often super conscious about not just coming in as an artist and just speaking on behalf of someone else. And that's where it goes into me engaging that particular space and say, okay, let's talk together. Let's have a conversation that then can be interpreted on this wall. So I think for me, it's about that process of collaboration to say that my artist statement isn't supreme, but yet this conversation is what's going to fuel what eventually happens, and then it becomes this joint of words as opposed to just my words. And so that's the way I've been able to deal with that. But that's a good question.
And I mean, for me, as long as something's coming from a genuine place, and it's not self-advantageous, right now, I've come across organizations that are getting into prison reform, and it's not because they genuinely care. Right? They're getting in it because it's a hot thing to get into and you get funding. So I've come across some things like that, but it's pretty easy to tell when people are genuine. Well, I mean, it is for me, I guess. So if something's coming from a genuine place and it's an issue that you care about, then I'm all for it. I'm not for creating barriers to expressing yourself in whatever way you want to express yourself about any issue. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people, right? We're all the same people. But on the same token, too, like what Mike was saying, like you don't want to speak on behalf of someone else. So I was very conscious of that when I created the solitary confinement cell. And that's why I recreated my solitary confinement cell. Because I didn't want to try and like speak on behalf of Albert. I didn't want to try to like embody his thing, because, you know, it wasn't my direct experience. And I wasn't able to have that kind of like open dialogue where it was something that could have grown into this mutually creative thing. So I wanted to speak on my behalf. But that being said, like if you want to partner with people or organizations or anything, you know, as long as you're genuine and you allow for that open dialogue to happen and you work together and really listen rather than like force your ideas and force your voice on something that, you know, you might not know as much about.
Well, we do have time for one more. If you can make it really quick, I can slide you in.
Thank you. Very quickly, I was just thinking about the work that Ron English started doing a long time ago with corporations and his paintings. And a lot of people were just against all these things, but over the years, he got people to know, to get what was the issue. So my question is how more difficult it is for you guys to do it when you are painting about human rights and not only corporations. Thank you.
Takers, anyone?
You know, there's a word that I've actually been using for the past few years. It's a word that I've been sharing with friends, students that I've worked with, and that word is complicit. I feel as though when we speak of all of these issues that plague our communities, we have to also understand that there are a lot of things that actually contribute to what's taking place in these communities that has to do with us directly. And so I personally feel as though, for example, I'm actually, I grew up here in Miami, and I've shared with friends, you know, over and over again that a lot of the things that we're seeing in our own backyard is our fault. And I'm referring to my generation. You know, we complained far too often that the civil rights generation did not pass the baton enough, but I also feel as though we did not seek to grab hold of the baton. So as a result, a lot of the things that we're complaining about taking place, you know, among the youth, it has to do, it has everything to do with where we failed. So whether it's the issue of human rights, whether it's the issue of how we're fighting against, I guess the friction that comes from the way certain institutions are, you know, are structured. I think we need to absolutely pay attention to how we play a role in this, and actually, for me, it's even deeper than South Florida. It goes even further when I have the same conversation with my father, because I'll tell him, listen, Congo is the reason why Congo is the way it is because it's our fault. You know, it's our inactivity. It's the fact that we're pointing the finger at those that know what to do but choose not to. We're pointing the finger at those that actually don't know what to do, and yet we're also forgetting about. And obviously, we look at those that don't have the heart for it, but we have to always keep in mind that we're complicit in some way, shape, or form. And so for me, it goes right back to that.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this is the panel. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for your questions. And a friendly reminder to please visit the Interactive Art Space where you can see their work on the second floor. But once again, please, everybody, give a round of applause to this lovely, lovely panel. And to Marvin Bing, wherever he is, wherever he's hiding. But thank you, and thank you all.